right, welcome back to Happy Hour with Heather and guest. I'm that other dude, Andrew, and as always, I'm joined by Heather. And I'm
Hello.
trying to. Is this the first? Uh, is this the first episode we're recording in 2024?
Yeah, yeah. We were supposed to last week, and unfortunately, I wasn't feeling very well, so we
Right.
had to postpone it. So now, yeah, now this is our first episode of the
Nice.
year.
The first one, and
Yeah,
it's episode 101, so that's fitting. It's the first one. Um, and today
yeah,
we're going to talk about a band called TEL. This was your suggestion. And in Heather and I keep a shared Google Calendar that we update, and in the update you wrote a farewell,
yeah.
and it wasn't until
Mm.
after I began listening that I realized that the band had disbanded. So on
Yes,
that note,
yeah.
so you can begin your analysis.
Okay, well, they were a band from 2016 until 2023, and they started with a self-titled EP. And then their first album is called Low Life. Their most recent album, Widower, was released in October of 2023. And unfortunately, that was their last. And they have since disbanded. And I wanted to talk about them. I wanted to give them a farewell. And I wanted to let them know how much their music is appreciated. According to their Bandcamp, their self-titled debut was recorded on a warm Sunday afternoon in the early spring of 2017. And I was listening to it on a cold, snowy day in January of 2024. Their first full-length album, Low Life, was released in 2019. And the song Submerged was on their self-titled EP, and then it was also on their album. My favorite part of that album is the last part of the song Submerged, where it gets more dense and heavy. And then the song Red Level begins, and it has harsh vocals and the most amazing drum pattern. It goes from harsh to clean vocals and then back again. And there's also a really groove-driven guitar part that sounds almost atmospheric, and then that amazing drum pattern again. And the final song on the album is Strangers, and the build-up of power on that song is so phenomenal. I could actually feel it in my stomach. And then the album Widower. Oh my gosh. It sounds like they put everything they had into this album. The vocals are absolutely incredible. There's the use of keyboards, adding another layer with dreamy vocals. And then when the harsh vocals come in, I got a real sense of anger and frustration. The atmospheric doom is what pulled me in, and the progressive elements along with atmospheric sludge. And then the hammer really comes down when they get to the song Acetone. There's death doom, funeral doom. It deals with a lot of difficult themes like death, addiction, trauma. And I feel like there's a sense of hope too to keep going. And I wasn't expecting all these different elements in this album, and it really, really surprised me. The album is beautiful, it's heavy, it's complex, but it's also accessible. And this is their last album, and to end with this incredible body of work just speaks volumes of how impressive these musicians are. And I just think it's truly a stunning album.
Yeah, well, I wanted to linger for a little bit before I jumped in. That it is an impressive album. Um, yeah, so I only listened to to Widower. And it's interesting because I didn't really know what to expect at first. I looked up their band name. I know TEL, I think, is Hebrew for a mound or something like that. Uh, and then I went on Bandcamp and was reading about Widower, and this is what the band wrote on Bandcamp. They said, if you're reading this, the band TEL have split up. We were here, we did what we could, and then we were gone. The album Widower is our final farewell. Widower is the culmination of several years of isolation, depression, toxic relationships, addiction, poverty, frustration, all experienced throughout the course of a global pandemic. Throughout the songwriting and recording process of this album, a tension began to grow in the air, spilling over into the performances of the tracks themselves. Once that tension was close to reaching a breaking point, it manifested in the completion of the album's closing track, Hostile. A few weeks after the final track was completed, TEL disbanded. As we begin to move forward from the turbulent years that went into writing and recording this album, we present these 7 tracks to you as a shedding of a past skin. The purpose of this album is to expel the anger, anxiety, and despair that we keep hidden in our everyday lives. Hopefully, it may provide some catharsis to those who are seeking out that same release. So that answered a lot of questions, and then it begged a lot of questions that I would want answered. First, with the album, I, similarly to you, had a very visceral reaction to it. It does have a lot of really complex, seemingly polarizing things. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of harsh vocals, and yet I found I really enjoyed them. And there were a ton of different genres being represented that they make work really well. The whole thing was very haunting and ethereal. Like, that was the vibe I got. And then it made more sense sort of after I read that, understanding what went into these tracks, that they were channeling a lot of the angst that they were going through as a band. And I wanted to ask, at what point did they realize this was going to be it? Was it simply that they used frustration to kind of go into the track to find the motivation for it? Or at what point were they like, okay, this is going to be it, let's just leave it out on the table? And then that reminded me, because I'm me, of the film Raging Bull. So in the late 70s, Martin Scorsese had a really horrible cocaine addiction that put him in the hospital. And Robert De Niro, who had been a fan of the book Raging Bull and had wanted to make it into a movie, visited Scorsese at the hospital, and he said, look, you're probably going to die. Pull yourself together. Let's make this film that'll help you kick your addiction, and we can get you back on track. So they agreed to make the movie. And at the time, Scorsese thought, this is going to be my final picture that I'll ever make. So he basically poured everything he had into the making of the film. So I wonder if the band members realized, okay, this is it. Let's go out on top. Or if that was just a result of what happened because of all the frustration and angst that they were feeling, if that was just natural. And then the last thing it reminded me of is there's a great documentary called Hired Gun, which is about session musicians. And at one point they interview Alice Cooper, who for a very long time now has basically licensed the name Alice Cooper from the original band members. So now it's just he's become synonymous with Alice Cooper, even though that was the name of the band. So every year he pays them royalties for the use of the name, and now he just has a backup band that he puts together. So he talked about how the really important thing, and this was my interpretation of it, was anyone can shred. And I mean, it obviously takes a lot of talent to be able to play an instrument really well, but you're going to be spending 20 hours a day with the same people, probably in a bus or in a room. So it's more important that you're able to get along with these people than like just finding an excellent musician who eats your peanut butter on the bus. And then you get into an argument about, did you eat my peanut butter or not? And also, I feel like after reading this, unfortunately, perhaps the band was a victim of circumstance. Had there not been a global pandemic, perhaps some of these difficulties would have worked themselves out naturally. But everything was sort of magnified by the fact that they're going through a once in a lifetime situation. So I don't know, but it brought up all these questions, and hopefully we'll be able to speak with one of the band members at some point to get clarification on any of this.
Yeah.
But but yeah, I really liked the album, and then I read this and went back and listened to it again, and it sort of took on a new meaning, knowing that it was their final. I mean, I knew that they had broken up or disbanded, but I guess that knowing the history of it now and sort of how the album came together, it gave it more depth. So
Yeah.
it's really good. I mean, I'm really glad that you recommended we listen to this. And it's interesting because I forgot who the previous. Sometimes you'll recommend things that are right in my wheelhouse, and it'll be really easy for me to recognize right off the bat, like, oh, I know why Heather brought this up. And then sometimes it's something like this where it's like, oh, okay, this is not what I would typically listen to, because maybe I'd listen to the first few notes and it would be something not in my wheelhouse. But I'm glad I gave it the listen because there's a ton of stuff in here that I really like.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge fan of harsh vocals a lot either, but I feel like they have a purpose on
Sure.
this especially on this record.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's a purpose for the harsh vocals, and I think it's like, um they're used in a way that is specific instead of the whole album being nothing but harsh vocals. I feel like they really use them selectively and to get specific feelings and emotions across that, and make it easier for us to understand what those feelings and emotions might be.
Absolutely. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the decisions can be made because people think it's cool. Let's have a double bass drum on this because that's what Slayer does, and Slayer's cool. So let's, rather than this suits the song. And I think
Yeah.
you're right. I think everything on this album was necessary. It all works really well together. So I'm really glad we listened to Widower. I will now go back and listen to their other albums, just to see how they reached where the heights they did on Widower. But
Yeah.
well
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I'm really looking forward to speaking with, with them because, like you said, there's a lot of questions, and I can't wait to get some more insight,
Sure.
you know, on everything, on everything that they've done.
Yeah.
And I just hope that they continue on in some capacity and doing some form of music in some capacity. I hope that eventually that, they can move on and do something with music.
Sure. Also,
Yeah.
I think it's really important. I think you brought this up at the beginning, to validate. It probably wasn't pleasant to go through, and it's probably painful to think about at times, but I think both Heather and I are grateful that you made this album. I think there are a lot of people out there that are probably grateful that you made this album and released it, and we get to enjoy it. You know, it exists as a work of art that deserves to be out there. So I think
Yeah.
that's really important. If no one has told you that, um, I think it's important for you to know that we're grateful that you went through the trials and tribulations to make this album so that we can listen to it.
Yeah. And some of the themes that they touch on, you know, have been through,
Sure.
you know, the unpleasantness in life, that people have been through. And, listening to an album like by yourself or knowing that someone else has listened to the same album, it's kind of, it kind of gives a sense of community also. Like, hey, we, we've all been through, hard times or this specific thing or this specific thing, and two people that have been through similar things listening to the same album, there's like this sense of community about it.
Sure. And I think it does provide a sense of catharsis if you're dealing with any of these issues on your own and you hear it in the song and it allows you to expel them, or at
Yeah.
least process them better. So,
Yeah. And to know that other people have been through it too
sure,
can be very comforting.
absolutely. Well, I am grateful that you suggested this band, and that we were able to give them a proper farewell. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And thank you to the band for putting out the album. So,
Yes.
I think that's gonna, unless you have anything else you want to discuss, I think that'll probably do it for this episode. Um, and we'll be back, of course, next week. But
Yes.
we hope you're all having a happy new year and a good start to 2024. I'm excited to continue on and discuss music with Heather. So until
Yes.
next time, we will see you next week.
Adios, amigos.